Lawyers of Reddit, what is the most fucked up case that you have fought or seen? Not safe for work, part 2. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. The summer after my first year of law school, I interned at a public defender's office. I went to meet a new client who was accused of rape. Within 20 seconds of meeting the man, he told me he was not guilty and had proof. His proof was, I tried to rape her, but was too high on meth to get an erection. Needless to say, we didn't go with that defense, and my internship ended before we went to trial. Not me, but my aunt was a lawyer, and she worked on the BTK case. I only learned about it once I was an adult, and when she mentioned it, seemed really far off mentally. I've never looked the case up personally, but I know what the BTK stood for. I can't imagine having to see the evidence in that case and be in the same room as the man. I repped a vet on an SSD claim, leg amputated at the hip due to an IED explosion, very bad PTSD on top of the physical disability, denied twice by a hugely vindictive judge for what I believe to be political reasons, ended up getting him approved after a reversal in federal district court. Very satisfying. Good for you. F that judge. Older husband and young wife were found guilty of murder. Young wife cheated on husband and had a baby girl. Husband decided to keep the baby and took out a $25,000 or $50,000 insurance policy on the baby. They end up taking a several-day road trip where they starved the baby to death. Husband took it to trial. All I can think about is the doctor testifying that the baby would have cried because she was hungry for so long before it became too exhausted to cry any longer. I've been doing criminal law for years, and this is the only one that I still think about. Maybe because the wife and I have been trying to have a baby. Evil exists. Kill them. My friend was a defense attorney and worked on a cannibalism case. The guy was found guilty of the charge. Upon looking into the case, my friend saw that the defendant had 2 brothers. Turns out, one brother was also arrested on charges of cannibalism in a different state. The other brother was an accountant. He paid for the attorney fees and wanted absolutely no communication regarding the situation. I wonder how that third brother is doing. Tastes great. Not me, but a good friend is an attorney. He used to practice criminal law, but one case made him move to estate law. It was a drunk driving hit and run. The driver didn't kill the person, but he threw him into the roadway where another car ran over him, killing him. In the evidence photos was one with clear tire marks over the victim's chest. He said it was too much to deal with defending that, and he changed legal specialities because of it. I have to be vague with the details, but my client and several of his friends snatched a young woman in broad daylight. She was sexually assaulted by all of them over a 2-day period. Imagine the worst kind of assault possible where the victim survived. They then drove around arguing in front of her about how they should kill her and dump the body. They even stopped in some nearby woods and started digging her grave. Oddly, they decided they could trust her and decided not to kill her. They left her naked in the woods and drove off. Posted this a while ago on a different thread, but it's worth repeating. This was a good while back when I began as a public defender. TLDR, client was guilty twice. Now, as a public defender, you don't so much get asked to take cases so much as assigned, but I'm going to count this one so I have a chance to tell the story. So when you get assigned to a case, you get a file that generally consists of the police report and any witness statements that may have been taken by the police and/or DA. Because the state has a duty to disclose evidence to the accused's counsel, in the states anyway, if they know of the existence of video surveillance, generally the DA would stamp in the report KSWP, known surveillance will provide. I get a routine destruction of property case where my client is accused of destroying a computer monitor. The officer's account of the case was simply surveillance reviewed, client taken into custody, stamped with the red KSWP. Client called and sounded much more reasonable than she would turn out to be. She calmly explained it was a wrong place, wrong time issue, where she was passing through the tripped to hit the computer at a receptionist's desk, so we schedule an initial meeting for Friday. Friday comes around, and about 10 minutes prior to the client's arrival, a runner from the DA's office delivers the CD with the video. being a bit busy at the time, I figured I'd watch it with the client when she arrived. She arrives and again seems just fine. I mention that we have the surveillance and could go ahead and review it, and she pleasantly agrees. Her and her reasonably well-dressed husband come in, joke a bit about how awkward this all is, and sits down across from me. I turn the monitor around so we can watch what happened. In the 5 minutes of surveillance provided, the first 4 minutes were a mundane scene of a receptionist answering phones with a pair of double doors behind her. I fast forward, then cue the music. I watched my client kick open a pair of double doors, screaming at whatever was on the other side. She leaves, then comes back in, screaming again, and re-enters the double doors. Then I see security guards gently escorting her out as she is screaming at them. Security stops at the double doors. My client goes over to the reception desk and leans over the counter to, you guessed it, grab the computer monitor, take it over her head, and bring it smashing to the ground. She gives a finger to the security and leaves. We watched the next 30 seconds in stunned silence, and the tape goes black. Now, I knew enough to watch my client's reaction during this, and she was a goddamn statue. Didn't move. Stared at the screen with the smile of someone who has killed before, probably. Then, she turns to me and said, "So, what are you gonna do about this?" I didn't know what to say, just kinda stared at her. Well, probably work on a plea deal. Hopefully you pay them and get a couple of hours. I didn't do it. Well, yes you did, I just watched it. She stands up, and without breaking eye contact, grabs my computer monitor, lifts it up, and smashes it on the ground. She picks up her purse and walks out. Her husband follows, but turns to me in my doorway and gives me the finger, shaking his head in a "for shame" kind of way. I did not take the case. Should have picked her up over your head. I'm a prosecutor, and in this position, I have seen my fair share of heinous, terrible shit that people do to others. That being said, the first murder case I was a part of during my judicial clerkship still hits me the hardest. The victim's brother had previously shot a close friend of the defendant, didn't kill the guy, but it apparently called for retaliation in the form of killing the victim. Scene: family barbecue in the backyard. Defendant waits behind the neighbor's garage until victim pulls up into the parking spot out back, walks up from behind and shoots victim point blank in the back of the head with a .357 execution style. Why this is seared into my memory forever? Victim hadn't heard defendant come up behind him because he was greeting his 2 young kids. Both were within 3 to 5 feet of him. Daughter had run up because victim had picked up some candy for her from the gas station, and the little boy was sitting on a big wheel. All of this was captured on 1080 HD surveillance video and was center frame. One of my tasks as the judge's law clerk was to keep all the evidence that was admitted in my office until the trial was over. This included all of the victim's blood-soaked clothes and the bullet fragments the medical examiner pulled out of his head during the autopsy. Knowing I wanted to be a prosecutor, that was my fork in the road for deciding whether or not I had what it took to deal with that kind of brutality. I'm glad I chose to continue down the path because I love my job, but this case will always haunt and always have a front row spot in my mind. Defendant was convicted and sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. I have another option for him. Defended a dental school in malpractice case. Patient was college-age man who went to the school clinic to have his teeth cleaned. Needed extra work because his teeth were very nasty. 2 days later, he collapsed and was taken to hospital. Several days later, doctors find an abscess in his brain. He ended up brain damaged, bedbound, basically a nightmare of a life. Family argued my clients had released the bacteria from his mouth into his brain. Theoretically possible, but they couldn't prove the bacteria that injured him was identical to the bacteria they had been in his mouth. We settled the case. He lived 5 or 6 years and died before he was 30. I was a court judicial aide for a few years after college, the person that sits next to the judge. The hearing was for a mom trying to get custody back of her daughter. She was taken because mom was a junkie and they found the daughter in a trap house and the mom was passed out. Daughter was placed with grandparents who were really well off and really loved their granddaughter, and it was the best place for her. However, mom had gotten a job and tried getting her back. Mom is legit nodding on the courtroom, but since she had held the job for 30 days straight, The court ruled that she was now fit to parent and was given back to the mom. I'm sitting at a restaurant going through the thread, and my mother starts talking about the case of a man who made friends with another guy who had a girl with heavy learning disabilities. She could barely talk, even at 6 years old. An old guy, he helped raise the kid because her mother wasn't there, so he became this kind of grandfather figure for her. He would keep her on the weekends to give some breathing to the father. Fast forward a few years, the guy gets a girlfriend who has a girl the same age as the other one, so they start becoming sisters. This one, though, has no learning disability. One day, the disabled one goes to the guy's house, and the second girl doesn't want her to go alone, because, as it turns out, he's been sexually abusing her forever, and she did the same to the other girl. They busted him with 40,000 pictures of the victims, though he denies jacking off to it. The man is an awful freak. As I'm writing this, she's going on about another case of a guy who lives in her mother's daycare and abused 2 kids 10 years apart. I don't know which is worse, but I really want to go home. Obligatory, I'm not a lawyer, but an ex was working as a paralegal when a lawyer she was assigned to had to take on a defense case. The case was a prominent murder case in our city. Here's a brief rundown of the case. A university lecturer got into a relationship with a student under him. Their relationship was turbulent. Toward the end of things, the victim ended things with the offender, and he did not take it well. He was boiling away. Then he discovered she had been given a job at the government treasury. This sent him over the edge. He packed a knife into his laptop bag and went over to her parents' house to see her. He was let in by the victim's mother, and so he went upstairs to her bedroom to talk. Minutes later, the victim's mother said she heard her daughter screaming, and she rushed upstairs to her aid. She tried to open the bedroom door and found that the offender had blocked it with a set of drawers. The screaming stopped, and the victim's mother described as hearing a repetitive thud thud thud. She phoned the police, and the first officer on scene described breaching the room to find the offender holding a bloody knife and the victim deceased. The first words he said to the offender were, "What have you done?" To which the offender replied, "I killed her." It would come out during the trial that the victim received 216 separate knife injuries, mostly stab wounds, but included scissor wounds. There was also blunt force injuries, self-defense injuries, and wounds targeting aspects of beauty intended to disfigure, specifically targeting breasts and genitalia. That's pretty fucked up. But in a display of the narcissism that drove the offender to such a violent act, and despite admitting to the arresting officer that he had killed her, the offender instructed his lawyer to prepare a defense of provocation. He argued that his victim had spited him during their relationship by telling him about how she slept with other men when they had broken up, that the abuse was a two-way street, and that on the day of the murder, they had gotten into an argument and she had attacked him first. My ex was thoroughly freaked out by this guy. During visits to prison to construct their defense argument, she talked to a couple of guards who said that the offender was by far the most dangerous individual they had in custody. He would be sitting eating lunch, and then at any moment would just turn and stare at other prisoners or guards. Needless to say, he was found guilty and provoked the removal of the provocation defense from our legal system. His entire premise was the defense was to drag the family through reliving the brutal death of their daughter.